Now we're finally to probably the most important part of TypeScript, which is how do you type objects? For example, if I have a person object, and this person object is going to have a name, an age, and so on. So let's just say I have a name, which is Kyle, and we'll do an age here, which is 28. So I have a person that has a name and an age property. How do we actually go about typing this specific person? If I hover over this person object, you'll notice it actually does a good job of giving me an inferred type. It's saying since I've defined an object that has a name and an age property and I've given them default values, TypeScript is essentially saying, hey, you know what? Your person probably is going to have a name, which is a string, and an age, which is a number. So it already does really good inference on what my person should look like. But sometimes my person object should have other properties that aren't actually defined in my default value. For example, later on, I may want to say person.isProgrammer equals true. And now I'm going to get an error because this is programmer is not in my person object type. And that's one important thing to understand about TypeScript when you're typing an object. If you don't include a property in your type, for example, this does not have an isProgrammer property, it's going to throw an error anytime you try to access or set that property. So what we need to do is we need to manually type this to tell it, okay, this is something that has a name, which is a string, an age, which is going to be a number, and it's going to have this isProgrammer variable, which actually could be optional. For now, we're going to not worry about this optional thing part, and we're just going to type this out as is. The way that we do that is just our normal colon syntax here, followed by some object curly braces, and then essentially we write it like a normal object. For example, I'm going to say name here, but instead of giving it a default value, I give it a type, which in our case is going to be string. Same thing for the age. I'm going to come in here, I'm going to say age is going to be a number, just like that. And the important thing is you need to make sure you separate these by a semicolon, and that's how it's going to determine which one is separated by what. If I came in here with a comma, that could work as well. Either one is going to work just fine, or I could even use a new line to separate them. It doesn't matter as long as you use a semicolon, a comma, or a new line, all of those are going to work. So now if I save, you can see it's automatically formatting this with the semicolon syntax, and I'm getting the exact same type right here. Now, if I wanted to make it so this isProgrammer property is going to be actually optional on the thing, what I could do is I could say isProgrammer. I'm going to set that to a Boolean because I know that this is going to be a Boolean, but now I'm actually getting an error. The reason for that is because my person doesn't have an isProgrammer property on it because it expects an isProgrammer property to be either true or false. And that's another important thing to understand about objects. When you define a value for a property, for example, isProgrammer is a Boolean, that means that all objects must have that property. So this has to say isProgrammer is either equal to false or true. Otherwise, it's going to throw me an error. But obviously, I don't want that. I want it to just be able to be optional because I want some people to have this property and some people not to. So in that case, all you need to do is take your property name and add a question mark to the end of it. That means that this is going to be an optional property. Essentially, it can either be a Boolean or it can be undefined. And if we hover over that, you can actually explicitly see it says Boolean or undefined. That's what this question mark syntax is doing right here. So now I could define this variable here if I want, and it's going to work just fine. Or I could leave it off and define it later. It's going to work fine. Or I could just not even define it at all. And again, it's going to work just fine. Now this right here is just the very bare bones basics of how you type out an object, but obviously as your object starts to get more complex or if you have nested objects, doing this all in line like this is really difficult to read and understand, which is why in the next video, I'm going to be talking about types and interfaces as well as the difference between the two, which is essentially how you take these long types and extract them out into things that you can reuse across your entire code base.